So this is what Chicago looks like for a large portion of the year here. And I would just like to thank you, Michelle, and the whole organization for inviting both Chester and myself to come speak to you today. It's a great privilege, so thank you. So a little bit about the structure today. I will be giving you an introduction to the garden and its history and some of the highlights of the intensive horticulture and pruning that we do in the garden, and then segue into the espaliers, which Chester will go much more in depth into. So to get the audience oriented to where we are in Chicago, we are roughly in the first 1/3 on the eastern side of the country. We're on the 41st parallel, and despite being on the same parallel as Barcelona or Rome, we are in USDA zone 6A, which means we have a negative Celsius 23-degree winter and lows, and for highs about 32 degrees Celsius. Doesn't really get too much higher than that. So while the highs may be good for growing plants, the lows make it challenging. We are located along Lake Michigan, about 14 miles north of the city itself. And the land that we are on was once marshland. It was inhabited by the Council of Three Fires. And it was a really important marshland that connected a lot of the United States and was a confluence of trade for indigenous people before colonization. Post-colonization, the land went through a period of degradation. The marshlands were drained, and then after they were drained, the peat that was left behind would set fire. There was problems with flooding. And then, fast forward to the 20th century, there were many capital projects, large-scale changes made to the hydrology of the area to create a system of lagoons to help mitigate some of that rainwater and hydrology challenges of the site. So the garden is located amongst a series of lakes, a series of small lagoons. And essentially, it's been mounded from the dredge of those lagoons. And I mention this because it's really important to know the challenges of the soils that we are dealing with here. Very heavy clay soils that have been compacted and generally float around a pH of around 8. So very high pH, which makes it hard to grow certain stone fruits, which we'll talk about later. So the garden itself is quite young as far as botanical gardens go. We opened, our first accession plant was in 1968, and we opened to the public in 1972. And it's important to mention the history of the site. While we are called the Chicago Botanic Garden, we were actually founded by the Chicago Horticultural Society, which is much older. The Chicago Horticultural Society was founded in 1890 to basically create an organization of all the smaller plant societies to create one larger organization that could provide the plantings for the 1893 Columbian Exposition, the large World Fair, the White City, if any of you are familiar with that famous book, Devil in the White City. And so as the Horticulture Society, it was their imperative to have flower shows to teach the public about the joys of horticulture. And espalier was one of those things that we would teach back then in the early 20th century through our magazines and through teaching. So fast forward to today, we are really considered one of the world's modern and modernist botanical gardens. And I say that because we have a large portfolio of famous landscape architects, including the famous modernist Dan Kiley, who worked closely with Edward Larrabee Barnes to design many of the buildings of the campus. Today, we have about 28 formal designed gardens. I will talk about some of them a little bit later on, but you can see them highlighted here. We're also known for our beautiful natural areas. All those site challenges that I had mentioned earlier led to our science and restoration teams to develop cutting-edge restoration practices to both restore our prairie and our savanna grassland oak habitats. One thing I didn't mention before, but the area that we are in is essentially where the forest meets the prairie. And in that intersection is the savanna. So if you picture the savannas of Africa, but apply North American plants, that's sort of what the natural areas around here would look like in addition to those wetlands that I had mentioned earlier. So we have 4 beautiful natural areas, including many shoreline restoration plantings, which were also pioneered to stabilize the degraded shorelines, which were as a result of those digging of the lagoons. We're also known for our science programs, both in ornamental horticulture, in plant evaluation, and plant breeding. We introduced the first orange coneflower, Echinacea, by crossing Echinacea purpurea with Echinacea paradoxa. Our plant evaluation program is one of the largest in the country and is highly influential, run by Richard Hawkey. If any of you follow a lot of perennial horticulture, you may know his name. We're also really known for our conservation science with a partnership through Northwestern University and the Nagoni Institute of Plant Science. And we're known for a lot of our pedigree work in applying zoo methodology to plants to help restore rare and imperiled and exceptional species. And like any botanic garden, we have so many programs around education. We have a winter lights display. We have an urban agriculture program called Windy City Harvest, which is one of the largest in the country. And we have a lot of internships and programs like our veteran internship program, which is a really impactful program for the garden. Now I'm going to talk about some of the garden highlights before I hand you over to Chester to talk about the espaliers. And I wanted to highlight plants that gardens and horticulture that I thought was adjacent to espalier. Not espalier itself, but highly intensive horticultural practices that are in the same spirit of espalier. And so I wanted to highlight the Sansho-en, our Japanese garden, the Garden of Three Islands, which was designed by Koichi Kawana in 1982. The garden is quite beautiful, and it shows many examples of highly meticulous Japanese pruning, from cloud pruning of hedges and azaleas and magnolias to really intensive Milwaukee candling of pines, really all of the real tenets and efficient strategies of Japanese horticulture are applied to this garden. It's highly modeled after the Adachi Garden in northern Japan. If any of you know that garden, is considered one of the more modern examples of Japanese gardens because, again, Chicago is a modernist garden. So while this is meant to be sort of a traditional example of a Japanese garden, it is with a modern spirit that it was designed and maintained. In that same vein, we have a very large bonsai collection. It's one of the largest in the nation. And we have many great examples of both traditional bonsai, but also a lot of modern examples of North American species and North American examples of both bonsai and penjing forest plantings. Our dwarf conifer garden was designed by Doug Hare in the 80s. And it is a really great example of a montane-designed conifer environment to sort of transport you to steeps or mountaintops where you would see these spruce and fir growing. I mentioned our evaluation gardens before. While our older evaluation garden was designed by Omi van Sweden and showcases mostly perennials laid out in a circular style that allows for comparative evaluation, our newest garden, the Shida Shade Evaluation Garden, which was designed by Peter Morrow Meyer, showcases a lot of examples of what I would say modernist espalier techniques, like these crabapple tunnels. So this is Malus Donald Wyman, which is a really great crabapple variety from North America, introduced by the Arnold Arboretum. And so we have acres of these tunnels where these espalier crab apples have been growing in since 2021. And so it's a quite really interesting example of not direct espalier, but in the sort of spirit of espalier and sort of formal hedging. Our English wall garden, designed by John Brooks and designed in 1991, is really an amazing example of an English wall garden in our continental American climate, and it really transports you to England. We have a lot of examples of a lot of traditional things that you would see in England, like an auricula theater, which we use to showcase smaller collections of not just auriculas, but everything from galanthus to violas and petunias, and it changes throughout the season, including many succulent displays. And one of the main features in this garden is this beautiful espaliered Malus floribunda, which I've already shown you a picture of in winter. But here you can see it in the middle of the growing season. Probably I'd say this photo is from June. So the June gloom between the spring color and the later summer color explosion. And so we're getting closer to the espaliers now. I want to highlight the Regenstein Fruit and Vegetable Garden, which was designed by Environmental Planning and Design in 1985. And this is a large scale example of like a European formal kitchen garden. If anyone has been to Etherrope, the Rothschild's kitchen garden, private garden, it has a very similar feel in its angles and lines. It has a long grape arbor, has many cold frames, and it's a really beautiful example of what I think is, when I think of an English formal kitchen garden, but still in a very modern sense. It has very nice materiality, very nice lines to it. It's also very abundant and showcases many different examples of ways that you can grow food. There's many areas which feel kind of wild and informal, like underneath our grape arbor here on the left. You know, you see these giant plume poppies, and it feels very, very kind of lush and shaggy with lots of textures. And then you have these really meticulous laid out Victorian style beds of lettuce. And it serves as a great variety to teach people about different vegetable varietals and different fruit varietals, but also how to grow them. And we have a great partnership with a seed grower here, so we can always kind of showcase newer varieties alongside older varieties. And there's a lot of rich diversity in this garden. And of course, now we're getting closer to the espaliers. We have the majority of our espalier at the garden are within the Regenstein Fruit and Vegetable Garden. And I won't spend too much time on these because Chester will go much more in depth. And here you see the beautiful horizontal cordons here. And then here, this is a pyrus that Chester will go into that is in two parts. There's a much older planting that's a few decades old, and then a younger planting on the backside. So it's an example of us sort of restoring some of the older plantings that we have here. And with that, I will transfer this presentation over to my colleague, Chester. If anyone has any questions, I'll be available at the end of this. So thank you very much. Chester, take it away.
Good afternoon. As Adam said, my name is Chester Jankowski Jr. I'm a senior horticulturist here. And my first year, 10 years ago, I was an intern studying espalier. Now, 10 years later, I get to present on it. So this is a great opportunity for me to teach and talk about our collection here at Chicago Botanic Garden. So you can see this photo here is a picture of the fruit and vegetable garden way back in the 80s when it was built. And we'll talk about a lot of our 62 formal examples of espalier at Chicago Botanic Garden. So I think we all know what espalier is, but as a botanic garden, our job is to educate the public. And so espalier is our fruit trees or ornamental shrubs. We have a lot of different examples of things you might not necessarily see as espalier, such as hamamelis or cornus vos. And 9 times out of 10, you will see them against a flat wall. We have a lot against the brick walls of our fruit and vegetable island. as well as our visitor center, which you will see an example of, as well as some of our more upright fences inside the children's gardens. So there are a lot of different shapes and forms, starting with the more formal, which we'll go through, or the natural shapes. Why are we doing it? Again, we are a educational botanic garden with 1.1 million people that come and see our work. One of the things I love most is to educate and to talk about what we are doing. And so highlighting that you can grow fruit trees in small spaces. Chicago is a town or a city of about 6 million people. There's a lot of people in the urban parts of the city that have brick walls and small yards. And what a better way to do or to try and grow fruit trees than espalier, where you can manage it. You don't need a ladder. You don't need an orchard. You could also start to blend zones and try things like persimmons or some prunes that are a little bit more touchy or don't love our harsh winter temperatures. So again, education is huge about why we do things here. Yes, we have landscape architects that highlight their work and their designs, but especially on the fruit and vegetable island to show why and how to grow fruit, and then to actually use and harvest and donate that fruit from the island, which is one of the best parts of our fruit and vegetable island, is most, if not all, of the produce, vegetables, stone fruits, apples, pears, you name it, that come from the garden get donated if they don't get picked off by our 1.1 billion visitors. So this whole presentation got me kind of interested, considering we are in America and we are a younger garden. Where did espalier in America start? And so it seems like the basis of it, from as we were becoming a nation, used were mostly for privacy or for hedges and less for productive fruit. And so a lot of the research I found was in the mid 1700s using espalier fruit trees to cord off rooms, to create borders, to create formal allées, and less about formal fruit production. But as we started to collect or test what we could grow here as we became a young nation, things got more productive fruit-wise. And so pears, peaches, and cherries and things started to evolve with newer varieties.
And Chester, I just want to add real quick, Liberty Hyde Bailey, who's considered one of the like fathers of American horticulture and helped establish the land grant college university system here in America, that's pioneered in the kind of early 20th century. He was really a strong proponent of bringing espaliers back into American homes and American gardens, and that sort of kind of kept espalier going and popularized through the turn of the century up through into the mid-century there. So sorry to interject there.
No, of course. I mean, I went as far as to find that our founding father, George Washington, the first president of the United States, had espaliers at Mount Vernon, which is one of our oldest gardens, considering nothing was accredited before that. So Mount Vernon has some original espaliers on it. But again, they were really only to act as borders and almost novelties and less for fruit production, which we are trying to teach here at Chicago Botanic Garden. So again, why are we pruning these? Why are we training these? Why are we teaching about these? And there's so many benefits to growing a smaller tree on on a wall, on a fence, on some sort of barrier. It keeps pests out, it keeps things warm, it keeps all of the fruit easily to pick, it allows all of the fruit to ripen more easily. Again, you don't have to use a ladder. You don't have to break any branches, pruning it hard every single year with a chainsaw. there's a lot of benefits to growing these espaliers, especially when you have talented horticulturists like we do here at Chicago Botanic Garden to kind of foster and keep them going for years and years and years and years. So now we're going to start to get into more of our specific examples. At the Regenstein Fruit and Vegetable Garden, which Adam talked about, there are 38 different examples of espalier from apples, which are the easiest and the largest percentage of our collection, to Cornus moss, which is our oldest, to Prunus, which don't necessarily like our basic soil or heavy clays, to our grapes, which have been espaliered almost as long as anything has been in the history of mankind, to Pyrus and Carpinus, which I'll talk about next. But let's not forget about the children's garden, because beautiful espalier specimens can't be wasted on the children. This was one of the gardens I primarily oversee, and the outside rung of this entire outdoor classroom, which was built in 2012, is surrounded by Red Delicious and Granny Smith, very well-known American varieties that children should know, and if they don't pick them all before they are ripe, get to enjoy. And so here's some of our traditional and formal patterns. You could see on the right is one of our grape varieties, which we have been cutting back for almost the past 20 years. We have a whole section of our espalier on the fruit and vegetable island dedicated to grow grapes. You could see that they've got nice heavy gauge wire to train them. On the left, we have a malice grown in a nice single cordon with next to it reflected as well. And so that one on the left is Malice Grenier 1198, and it's about 11 to 12 years old, and you can see it's got that beautiful, perfect 45-degree angle. Next is our double cordon. I mentioned that these are surrounding our children's garden, and so on the left is our Malice Granny Smith, which are a little bit younger, but are around 15 to 18 years old. They came in as mid-size whips and have been trained on the spot to create that double cordon pattern since around 2012. One of our more impressive specimens, which is a 38-year-old pear, Pyrus comus, has been living on the fruit and vegetable island almost since it was created. And you could see it's got almost perfectly even slats, lateral branches that go all the way through. One of our most productive varieties of espalier that we have on the fruit and vegetable island. These are our oblique cordons, which is Malice Red Jewel, which we've grown in the style of a Belgian fence. You could see they've got almost maybe 30 to 45-degree crossing pattern. These were formerly installed on our old visitor center to create a Belgian fence that lived there for about 30 years until 2023, when we had to unfortunately remove them and replace them with Parodia, which we will be training forward in a similar style to act as a reverence or a remembrance of our Malice Red Jewel that we had originally. Every time I think of these, I think of our tram driver that drives by, that takes off from our visitor center, that the line is, those are not vines, but those are trees. And so every time you look at them, they look like vines. They are, in fact, Malice Red Jewel. One of the harder, more difficult patterns in espalier is the candelabra or U-shape. This is Malus redsheaf, and you could judge by the size of those bottom branches that come out at almost parallel to the ground that this is an old tree. This is in our largest area of espaliers. It's around 35 years old, and it's one of the more difficult, in my opinion, forms to have a very productive tree because it requires a lot of pruning to keep its shape. Therefore, it needs a lot of maintenance and it's a very difficult form to keep. Here is another formal example. This one on the left welcomes you to the fruit and vegetable island. It is a heirloom apple, Wolf River, which is from our neighbors to the north, Wisconsin. So it's an heirloom variety from Wisconsin and one of the best shapes of U-shaped candelabra that we have. Same with the one on the right. The shape is almost perfect if you look at the diagrams and the books. Going from most difficult to most attainable or easiest are some of our more informal or fan shape palmate examples. This is a Prunus avium batalon, and next to it is ridgewood. And you can see that they're not as rigidly 90-degree angles, no sharp turns. Almost let the plant tell you where it wants to be. It's nice, it's natural. There's no rules or hard prune cuts. The trees are a lot more attainable for the visitors to grow. Generally, I find them to be more productive because you aren't trying to keep it to look a certain way. You can allow it to be a little bit more natural. Exactly what I just said. It's very much, there's another thing, there's no supports in the back, right? You don't need to have things equally spaced. You could allow these trees, if it's got a stronger leader or stronger side branching, and you have the space to kind of fill in anywhere you need it to. And so while these are kind of informal, if you've got a larger, bigger brick wall, you could almost, as long as you could support it, choose any shape you'd like. Speaking of more difficult again, Adam mentioned our heavy clay soils and our non-acidic soil. One of the things that I've tried and maybe have learned a hard lesson is to try different varieties other than apples and pears. And so I had the opportunity to start 2 bare root espaliers from scratch. I chose 1 cherry and I chose 1 peach. And while I say I did very well with a cherry in an informal style, I learned a lot of hard lessons from the peach, being that branches harden off very quickly. There's a very small time frame that you can train the branches. And as fruit trees go, there are a lot of diseases that will attack your fruit trees if they're not happy. So you need to really be on your game to grow things that are a little bit more difficult, especially in poor soil. This is my example of my cherry. So you could see it's in a kind of informal fan shaped. It's got some evenly spacing. There's no supports behind it. Our winters get very cold to about -5 degrees Fahrenheit. You could see we've covered our base of our trunks with some wrapping to stop from sun scald, or more importantly, the voles. One thing you've learned about vegetables or fruit trees is when you have an entire island dedicated to growing vegetables or trees, animals learn that and pass that information down from generation to generation. So everything wants to come and get your trees. So we take a lot of care in protecting them. Looking at the hedge that Adam mentioned before, this is one of the examples we use, dwarf rootstock. And so When choosing the right and best varieties of espalier, we choose things that are semi-dwarf or dwarf, and 9 times out of 10, they are grafted. When they're generally grafted on things that keep them small. And so we say right plant for the right place. And so if you want to keep a smaller tree, granted, this is one of our larger examples of espalier that we have, always look for semi-dwarf or dwarf rootstock, as that just keeps everything a little bit tighter and in check. So I always like to, if I can avoid using a ladder, that's a little bit easier to keep things up, because maintenance, nobody wants a high maintenance garden. Again, one of our oldest specimens is the Cornus moss. Our average age is 17 years old, of our 62 varieties. Again, with 1.1 million people and all of the diseases and pests and things that come after fruit trees, I think that's pretty good. And some of these other highlighted examples I will talk about a little bit before. 40% of our collection is apples, so Malice varieties. You could see we've got famed Golden Delicious, Holiday, Liberty, Red Jewel I talked about at the visitor center, which was our Belgian fence. Sweet 16, which is another very red, delicious. Honeycrisp, which is one of the more commercially grown species as well. But yeah, because of the ease of it, in espalier, Malice makes about 40%. These are two more of our informal prunus specimens that you could see need maybe a little bit of prune. We'd like to keep them below our wall over there, and I think our wall is 8. No, our wall is 10 feet tall. So if we keep them under, they stay a little bit happier. Otherwise, the winds coming off all of our shoreline, being on an island, burn all of the tips of our prunus trees up on top. So those need a little bit of a prune. Here's a very nice winter shot of our red jewel, and you could see we use some bamboo stakes to either trick the eye or to keep things in check, to tie it back to train new leaders, and to keep that really beautiful diamond pattern in and through. This is one of our dedicated volunteers. We have over 1,500 volunteers at the Chicago Botanic Garden, some of them who even are trained in espalier. And so this man has been working with me for the past 10 years, and I would have no other person, staff or otherwise, prune with me espalier than a volunteer. And so we're very fortunate to have wonderfully trained, dedicated volunteers to help us maintain all of these things. This is our Malice Winter Banana, which I think Adam likes to say in the style of a dragon, or we could say serpentine cordon. You could see the top of it, but there's a large gilded pumpkin of a large mammoth carnival-sized pumpkin. That's a great meeting spot for everybody out on the fruit and vegetable island. But one of our more interesting forms of a 35-year-old apple tree that, yeah, is definitely an interesting form. We keep highlighting this hedge because it's absolutely beautiful, though we could finally tell you what it is, and it is a Pyrus cascade. These are a Malice Stark Spur Supreme, another one of our more difficult forms. You could see how these two trunks at the base have formed into this cross pattern, that have merged into almost one trunk, creating a beautiful circle pattern below or right above the trunk, above the first branch. And so beautifully pruned on top, equally spaced, very productive. Look at all of those beautiful flowers. This is one of our most heavily fruited examples. And again, maybe they didn't have a lot of field trips this year because we have got a lot of fruit on this beautiful example of a Malus lodi, which is in the informal palmate style. It's a 30-year-old tree. And yeah, a lot of examples of beautiful red fruit that get equally ripened because of the thinned leaves around them. Again, it's a fruit and vegetable island. We donate as much as we can, and visitors donate to themselves by enjoying a nice, beautiful red apple like these. And then one of our last and most beautiful examples is Malus winesap, which is, again, you could see our big bank of beautiful espaliers down the left-hand side that are all kind of freestanding and supported. And on the right side is our big, beautiful brick wall, kind of protecting everything, allowing us to play with zones, to train things, and to really kind of highlight this art. Because there are not a lot of formal public gardens. And you could see the beginning of all of those espalier when the fruit and vegetable garden was first planted and what they have matured into, which is over 38 years. You could, if you squint a little bit, you could see it.
Yeah.
That being said, almost similar to bonsai, and the hope at a botanic garden is to never kill your plants. And so don't be fooled to think that these are fragile or replacements, with the correct care and time and energy. We hope, like I said, we're only about 50 years old, that some of these can live for hundreds of years old and still be productive. And so they're not as fragile as they may look. And while it may be an intimidating art form to get into, that doesn't mean you can't start at any time.
Oh.
And with that, I thank you all for going through this beautiful presentation with Adam and I, highlighting
Thank you.
our best and most interesting specimens of espalier at Chicago Botanic Garden.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Very, very beautiful trees. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. It's yeah. So Chester, you are the specialist of espaliers and
Yes, I am. I've kind of, as I mentioned, my internship here 10 years ago was to learn on that island how to train and how to prune them. And my mentor has taught me a lot. And as I managed a children's garden, I had a wonderful opportunity to start with small trees and to bring them from bare root to more formal trees. Not the 40 years at the Fruit and Vegetable Island, but over a 10-year period, you could definitely see some growth.
great. Any questions? Any question for Adam and Chester?
There's nothing in the Q&A. I have a question though. The island is on the water. The wind that you have must be, and the weather that you have must be quite extreme. It looks like you keep some of those old trees going just beautifully. Do you protect them at all, or do they just stay where they are?
Luckily, those trees are kind of central to the island, which is nice too. And so, yeah, the brick wall being on the west side helps to block a lot of the prevailing winds that come through. I would say the biggest is not necessarily the weather, but it is the animals. And so we have a terrible goose problem. So while you may think it's on an island, we have a bridge. We can't bring our bridge up like a drawbridge, and geese can swim and fly. And so for the vegetables, all of the animals know where the fruit and vegetable garden is. And the geese love the apples as much as anything else on the island as well. So that's probably our biggest challenge.
Est-ce que vous pouvez nous dire un mot à propos des porte-greffes, spécialement pour les pommiers et les poiriers?
Rootstocks.
Adam, do you have any rootstock insight?
Chester?
The question was about rootstock.
Yep.
I think there was two varieties that we have that we use primarily that have been bred by the University of Minnesota. Let me see if I could find them off the top of my head. Some of the older ones. So Bud 118 is a popular one. MM 106 and MM 111.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
I have a question, Michelle.
Yes, please.
You mentioned you try to stimulate visitors to grow their own espalier trees in cities. It's something we'd like to do in Holland and Europe as well. How successful are you? Are people trying this, or is it still too big a step?
There's been a little bit of newer gardens that have more public gardens, not botanic gardens, that have tried to implement the espalier and show maybe either dwarf varieties, not necessarily espalier, but more dwarf or patio style trees that are starting to catch on. We have a large container program of dwarf trees as well. As far as a espalier campaign, I think people are still very scared of pruning. To have the confidence to take a leader off a tree, it just breaks a lot of rules for people. And so we're hoping to build that through our beautiful examples, but little by little, we're hoping to build awareness. No big campaign yet.
Okay, thank you.
Do you offer training sessions for people who are interested?
So this presentation has led me to kind of spiff up my own kind of training course and presentation. So I think this is definitely pushing me in the right direction to maybe put together a training class and teach some people. Because I definitely have a lot of the bare bones on the back end.
Yeah, and the garden has offered them in the past to we have there's another horticulturist who works in our English wall garden who manages the Malus floribunda fan shape that she will offer espalier classes in person. They're usually like a 1 to 3 day course. But I'm not sure the last time we've offered it, but I think usually every couple seasons that it will come up.
Interesting. And let's say, why did you decide to have espaliers in the first place? Was it because you were having these walled gardens, or what?
Well, I think both. I think there are two reasons, right? Firstly, as a botanical garden, I mentioned we have an obligation to teach the public about horticulture, about the world of plants. And I think as the garden was being developed, they were very conscious to showcase these different examples, these different modes of how plants are grown throughout the world. And I think espalier is a very important integral part of that. And then you factor that into the harsh wind and the harsh environment. We're creating walls to cloister these plants. So it was advantageous to include espaliers, especially since we're trying to grow examples of fruit for folks. And where we have orchards that are more exposed, they're actually quite hard and they haven't quite been successful over the years. We have a stone fruit orchard that isn't cloistered by any walls. It's just open out on an island. And it's a real struggle to grow plants there, not only because of the soil, but also because of the wind. So I think the choice to include espaliers was, one, to educate the folks, and it needed to be included. And secondly, it was advantageous for the climate and the harsh conditions of the site.
What is impressive is the quality of your trees, because it's your trees are absolutely beautifully trained. It's very, very nice. Yeah.
Thank you.
Michelle, there are two questions
Yep.
asked. One is, are you in touch with garden and landscape academic research centers such as Dumbarton Oaks or Harvard?
We have connections with many places. Oak Springs Foundation is a organization that we have shared board members with and shared, past staff members with. As far as Dumbarton Oaks directly, I'm not quite sure if we've ever had any sort of real partnership or exchange with them. Our primary partnerships have been with Negaunee, which is, or with Northwestern University, other institutions around the Chicago area. But as far as Dumbarton Oaks or other cultural landscape foundations, so far, I'm not entirely sure. We are a member of the American Alliance of Museums, so we are an accredited museum for our collections and our library. But as far as Dumbarton Oaks or other landscape academia, I'm not quite sure.
And there's one more question. How is the Chicago Botanical Garden funded?
Many, many different ways. So it's very complicated. So we are a combination of private funding, public funding, and a lot of little scattered endowments in different areas and so on and so forth. We were, up until recently, a large recipient of federal funding, primarily for our urban agriculture and our conservation science programs. Now, obviously, that is up in the air, unfortunately, given the current climate, putting it nicely. But we are also kind of generously, blessed that we have a lot of private support. So we do have a lot of large funds that are going to allow to keep our science programs and our agriculture programs going. Up until a couple of years ago, the garden was free to visit. So we didn't have a large earned income revenue stream outside of private donations, tree dedications, so on and so forth. So like many public gardens in the United States, our funding structure is very complicated and right now kind of chaotic, unfortunately.
Do you find easily volunteers? And I think you train them also, huh? But are them easy to recruit them?
Yeah.
I think I'll let Chester talk, but I think they're easy to find, not as easy to train, right? It's like, I think finding someone with a good baseline that you can trust with a set of pruners. It's easy to find someone who can be a docent, easier to find someone who can be a docent than it is to find someone who can do real technical work. But I'll let Chester answer that.
Most of our volunteers are former professionals or let's call them doers. So they're people that were in high positions, either presidents or ex-CEOs, kind of where we are. We're in an affluent area of Chicago. And so a lot of people have can-do attitudes. And the ones that want to be outside could definitely learn some skills. And so you find the right types of people that want to use their hands, want to stay busy. Most of them are in their 50s, 60s, and 70s. I've got a man who's in his early 80s. And they come in, they give us 4 hours of their time, and you have to learn their skill set as much as they have to learn what to do correctly. And so, I mean, this garden would not be what it is without our volunteers helping us in every capacity. That could be raking up after I prune. That could be making sure traffic is out of the way as we're doing a large project. So, yeah, we're very grateful for our volunteers.
No, but what is impressive if you've got this volunteer for pruning espaliers. That's not so easy to find.
No, it's taken a long time to get him there, but yeah, it's definitely nice to have an ace in the hole.
Yeah.
Great.
Don't let him go. Michelle, I just have one more question.
Yeah, last question maybe. Yeah.
If that's okay. So a lot of gardens and people here in Britain and in Europe, there's, you know, huge movement for looking after the soil, learning what's in the soil, the importance of soil and what's under the ground, and more no-dig gardening and using organic principles. And are you doing all of that as well in Chicago?
We're doing a little bit of everything here. And the garden is a very, very large place. I mean, thinking of it more akin to, you know, it's even, you know, a place like Wisley where you have this combination of like different styles of gardens that require different styles of management, different levels of like you know, we have a highly formalized rose garden that, you know, still requires a lot of fungicide sprays, right? Given our, you know, the heat, we didn't go much into the summer temperatures here, but it's still high humidity and high heat in the summertime. So we have a lot of issues with fungal diseases. We have a lot of issues with drought, with the poor clay expanding and contracting. So you'll see different modes, and really, you know, the best way is to work with the soil that you have. And that's why, you know, we've kind of been moving away from trying to get stone fruits to survive in our native soil. And then in areas that are more formalized garden areas where we can change the soil and we can have like something that goes down a little bit deeper there, then that's the places that we showcase these plants that are harder to grow, because we don't want to rely heavily on chemical inputs. We don't want to rely heavily on pesticides, fungicides, pre-emergence. But in some areas, we do have to rely on them because of the aesthetic demands of some of the highly formal areas. But then in the areas that are more naturalized and on the margins between the natural areas, we're very cognizant about what we're putting down, because we're trying to prioritize wildlife and the ecosystem and, you know, all of the animals and ecological services that are happening in our natural areas. So the garden has a lot of these dualities of like a highly manicured, highly formalized, you know, human landscape, you know, juxtaposed with something that's supposed to be natural and for everyone. So that's a complicated answer of saying like, yes, we do, and yet no, we don't. Right.
Perfect.
Thank you so much, Adam. Thank you, Chester, for great presentation, and really congratulations for your beautiful fruit trees.